Hi everyone, I'm Iman Zabi, founder of Terrain. Welcome to another week of Terrain Experts. This week we're doing something a little bit different and sitting down with Maggie Patterson. Maggie is the editorial director of Scoop Studios, creator of Small Business Boss, and with over 2 decades of experience, Maggie has spent her entire career in client services and been a successful entrepreneur for over 15 years. She's the host of the BS Free Service Business Podcast and Duped, the dark side of online business. So she's basically Mythbusters for entrepreneurs, which is why I'm so excited to have her over so we can explore the more insidious side of our industry. Maggie's going to be talking about the status quo of marketing, how the status quo of marketing is based on fear, why trust is the alternative, and what you need to watch out for so you don't get duped. Maggie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Iman.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited about this conversation. And we were just talking about this a few seconds earlier, but I'm such a fan of your podcast because it's so needed. What really sparked your desire to create Duped? Where did this come from?
This is a great question. And we haven't been asked this yet because we've just been like, hey, we just showed up here with all these things to say. So my co-host, Dr. Michelle Mazer, and I have been friends for, I think, since like 2014. And we both have we have a communications background. So we really look at this in a different way. We have a lot of corporate experience. So we see things in the online space and we're like, wait a second, like, what? No, you can't do that. That's like, and so we would always have these back and forths. And the two of us, behind the scenes and publicly have been talking about things like bro marketing, which is not having a moment. Like back in 2014, 2015, I have blog posts referencing that. So does she. And so as we noticed this kind of shift last fall, we were like, hey, we've been talking about this forever. Maybe we should formalize and talk about these things because we have these conversations a lot of times behind the scenes with our clients, in paid engagements, with our business friends, but we weren't necessarily having them at scale. And we were like, you know what? We both have this background. We can really lend not just a conversation that's about complaining about this, what's happening, but really like, let's talk about what the alternatives are. Let's talk about what the solutions are and try to really focus on that. So Duped was literally ripped out of our DMs because we have this like never ending conversation all day, every day. And it was like, oh, did you see this? Oh, I got this ad. And we were like, okay, we need to like formalize this and like share this with people because it's actually a conversation that's worth having, especially as more and more people are realizing like what's happening to them in online business isn't serving them.
Oh, for sure. And I love that. And one of your episodes in particular, I think it was called The Culty Side of Online Business, was like, oh my goodness, we're all in a cult. And it's crazy because it is exactly that setup. You have like this very magnanimous guru of some kind, and you have people who blindly follow what they say. And that's super, super interesting. Can we dig into that a little bit more?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of my personal interests for pretty much as long as I can remember has always been cults. Like I read cult books, I listen to cult podcasts. I was really excited once upon a time when I saw the FLDS compound when I was in Utah. Like I mean, like this is not a recent interest. This goes back. Like it's something I've always been interested in because the psychology of it as humans, we always think, oh, that could never happen to me. Whereas I've always thought, oh, I totally see how this could work because you've got a charismatic leader and they're really good at what they do. And there's so many things that are in our day-to-day lives that are culty, that have these cult-like properties, whether that be how your family structure is set up, where you don't question your mother or your father, right through to something like Soul Cycle or Weight Watchers, or things that are not seen as culty, but they actually kind of are. And so I've anointed myself a cult expert as it relates to online business. And there's something I shared in that episode, which was from Dr. Stephen Hassan, which is the BITE model, which my sister and I talk about the BITE model all the time because she's also an amateur cult expert. You're the podcast reading book kind of expert, not the like actual like study this at school expert. And the BITE model is really about how we influence people. And last summer, in the height of a lot of things going on in the industry, I took out the BITE model and I started comparing it. I was like, oh, B, behavior control, information control, thought control, emotional control. And I literally started going through and checking it off. And I was like, Oh, like I've always joked it was culty, but then I was like, it actually is. Like there's a lot of parallels, especially when you get into things like thought control, emotional control, mindset manipulation. We've all had that experience or we've witnessed it of someone saying like, oh, it's just your mindset. You need to play bigger. You need to like do that, you need to invest more. And it's like, that's the exact same tactics they use in a cult. So when we're like falling prey to those tactics, whether that's something someone has learned from a coach along the way or it is intentional, doesn't really matter, but we need to protect ourselves from that. So that episode, we really went through that bite model and we're like, hey, this is what you need to pay attention to because the parallels are there and the harm being done is very real.
Yeah, and my next question was going to be whether you think it was intentional or not, but like going beyond that, how do you identify that you're falling, like how do you know you're in a cult from the inside?
Yeah, so one of the things we talked about a ton in that episode is really like go to freedomofmind.org, which is Stephen Hassan's website, and just go through the bite model. It'll take you 10 minutes, but you will start to see things like insider secrets that you're like, oh, wait a second. And even if something is not actually in this realm of it's a cult, because that's a whole leap.
Yep.
There's definitely this these persuasive tactics and undue influence that is being used on us day on and day out in online business. And a lot of the tactics that are super, super common in online business, they line up against the bite model. And I did write a post, did a podcast episode, like I watched The Vow, I watched Seduced, and I took notes like through all those episodes. And I was like, here's six things I literally see in common with online business, like things like NLP. You're a writer. I'm a writer. It's talked about a ton in copywriting circles. Coaches use it. But NLP was also used by Nexium to influence people. So we need to really think like beyond like taking something at face value and be like, oh, this is a method to like, is that person actually qualified? Should I let them in my head? Did they learn this in a weekend at the Ramada? What's going on?
Okay, so NLP is one example, but can we get into a couple of others that people can watch out for?
Yeah, another big one is limiting access to the leader. You see this a lot. This is a very, like if you know anything about any cult, right? Like you can never get to the person at the top. And we see this a lot in group programs. And it's done as a thing, as it's boundaries. But like, if I'm paying you $20,000, like, what do you mean I can't email you? Like, or we have this big focus on like in-group and out-group. That's another one. Whereas like, there's this us versus them thinking, and this happens in communities, it happens in masterminds, it happens in group programs, whereas we are the chosen ones. We are the only ones who really get it.
Yep.
And everyone else in the out group is like persona non grata. And if you've ever seen someone in a group try to leave that group, whether it be a mastermind early or something else, you will see that in action. I've seen it. It's terrifying. So those are just
100%.
a few. The other one is the constant like, you buy in at one level and that is, that chain of ascending up. We see that in Scientology where you keep buying the levels. We start off with a membership, then maybe we're going to go into a group program, then we're in a $30,000 mastermind, and it just keeps going because what they do is they hook you in order to keep getting your money.
That's interesting. And that's blowing my mind because the ascension model is pretty much the foundation of so many people's businesses. Okay, just to recap really quickly, because I want to make sure no one missed out on that. It was, the first thing was, well, I'm not going to do this in order because I have a terrible memory. It was in-group, out-group. And that's really interesting because like, I'm not, and I've been in that, I've been in those masterminds, which are like really high ticket and you're being, you're the golden child. But then when you're outside of it, there's this big fall from grace and like, you're just the outsider. And it feels like, I mean, at no point am I suggesting that the people in there did that on purpose, but you do feel like all of it was to get you to keep paying, which is really interesting. And like, if I'd stayed on, I'm sure I would have continued to have a great experience. But like the minute you're outside, you have perspective. And jumping back to that initial thought, that in-group, out-group, it was the ascension model and
limiting access to the leader.
Limiting access to the leader, another really big one, because so many times the leader's clout is used to sell the program, but then you pay thousands of dollars, but you never actually get access to them. That's really interesting.
And here's the question I have, like, why are we seeing this person's face all over? Like, why are they the brand when we don't actually ever see them again? We're handed off to their success coach or whatever it is, and they're never seen again. It's the bait and switch tactic is really culty too.
And the success coaches probably never run a business. They're a full-time employee.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I never get this.
Like, I don't know that I want, and this is like, am I getting the right level of coaching from someone who's doing a job for $20 an hour who doesn't have business experience? There are some amazing success coaches which have chosen not to run their own business. I will not totally rip that model apart, but I've got questions as always.
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. And can we also talk, I know you talk about this a lot, and I just saw your post on Instagram. It was about people who use almost like wealth signaling and talking about how much they've made as like as social proof, but it's always like it's their top line revenue, not their bottom line, not like how much they've, not their expenses, not how much they're like how they're spending their money. And it always reminds me of Trump. It always reminds me of Trump because he's like, I have a ton of money, but like I'm like, you would have had more money if you did absolutely nothing and just sat on your money for years. Like it's
exactly. Yeah. And the income claim marketing is a huge place of online business. And it's something like I published that post and essay this week, and it's been really interesting because people are so and I don't blame anyone for this. There is no shame in this. We have to unpack it and figure it out.
Yeah.
But in this industry, people have been so indoctrinated to think that this is normal, that we should be talking about our revenue as a way to gain trust, that we should be making guarantees saying I can get you to 10K or 20K or whatever, that untethering from that is really challenging and really difficult. And there's this underlying belief that we can't sell without it. And I'm like, hi, I don't do that in my business. I did once upon a time to a small degree, but I quickly was like, this attracts the wrong people. It sets expectations that are completely misaligned. And I don't want to be defined by how much money I make. Like, yeah, I make a great living. Me and my team are doing fine. We're doing good work in the world. But like, is money the only thing I want to be measured by if someone should work for me? How about my 20 years of experience? How about my experience in corporate? How about my experience as a small business mentor? All those things count. And I would rather see us focus on the things that actually make us an authority versus inventing authority based on how much money we make. And oh, by the way, a lot of people lie about this.
Oh, 100%. I'm convinced that I have seen some people, like there are people who like showed up in the industry, have been around lurking in Facebook groups, asking how to land their first $1,000 client. 3 months later, they're like, I had my first $30,000 a month. And I'm like,
how? Yeah, she was right. And here's the other thing. If you really start paying attention to these kind of, like I call them like creative or embellished revenue claims, you will quickly notice that the story changes over time. And there's one case, Michelle and I had a whole DM conversation on it, is someone was like, oh, back in 2018, I was down to my last, like the second someone has the struggle story, I'm like, my antennae go up, I start to pay attention. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But then 3 months later, I was having 6K months or whatever. I'm like, or, whatever it is. And I'm like, I went back and looked. I was like, 2018, that's not what you were telling us. So you've now established that you lie. Awesome. And now I really don't trust you.
I feel like marketers are a big part of that because like we always tell people like collectively that, oh, a rags to riches story is like a great way to pull on people's heartstrings. And I mean, I'm guilty of this. I have like the rags to riches story archetype in one of my decks. Like, I'm like, this is one of the ways you can position your story. And it's been a learning process for all of us. We have to, because it's just, we're also ingrained into it. You have to like, well, if a rags to riches thing is your actual story, absolutely talk about it. But like, don't manipulate your life to fit it into that mold just to make people feel sympathetic and get their pity money. Like, that's
And I mean, here's the thing, the rag to riches stories, I think in some contexts, not many make sense. But is that designed for maximum drama? Are you playing on people's trauma? Like, those are the questions. Like, well, what is the responsibility we have to our audience, and what is the level of respect we have for our audience? So when we think about our storytelling, like the struggle story, every single one of us could come up with a struggle story.
Oh,
But
100%.
what's missing from the struggle story, like if I were to be like, I was down to my last $2. Yeah, I could have just moved home. It would have been
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been living on the streets, but you can imply a lot without giving the actual story. And like, what about privilege? What about our identities? Like all that stuff factors into it. So I'm hoping the storytelling model shifts a lot away from that kind of hero's journey version of things.
So the other thing that kind of comes to mind whenever when we're talking about this is how people use hustle culture as like this badge of honor. And like, I'm guilty of this because I work insane hours. But then I feel like once when I was on a podcast, I actually had to acknowledge it because people were like, oh my God, you're this powerhouse, you're doing all these things. But I'm like, no, but I'm really privileged to be able to do these things. I'm single, I don't have kids. I'm very fortunate to have financially stable family. Like I don't have to, if I do go broke, if the business goes under, I have alternatives. I have a fantastic degree. If I wanted to go back and get like an actual job, I could. I can take these risks in my business. So like I feel like I could very easily market myself as like brown woman of color doing exceptional things, but like that's not the picture. That's not like reality. And I feel like people co-opt different parts of their identities and use them as like marketing. And I just think that's just crazy.
It is. And this is why, like, something I wrote at the end of last year is I basically was like, hey, everyone, like, I want to acknowledge all my privileges. I want to acknowledge all my identities. Here are my values. I just put everything out there in writing and in a podcast because I was like, I want you to know where I'm coming from. Like, yeah, I could tell you the job of how I quit my quit my job and didn't have a plan. I also have a partner with a stable Canadian federal government job and a pension. And we have healthcare and like, I could tap on any number of parts of my story to make it more dramatic, but like, why? Why would I do that? It's misleading. And for me, this just comes down to respect for everyone in the communities I am serving. And like, I'm going to treat everyone with fairness and dignity. And like me trying to pull one over with my story is really, that is not a way to build trust.
Okay. So since you're a persuasion expert and we've been talking about how not to do persuasion, how do people actually go about selling in a way that isn't sleazy? What does the ethical marketing really look like?
So I love this conversation about ethical marketing because it kind of makes me laugh because I'm like, ethical marketing is just the way marketing is done in the real world, not in this. The way we do marketing and we've been taught to do marketing in online business is very much this twisted version of marketing. It's not actual marketing. It's like fear-based marketing. So, we're very much rooted in these practices that make us do things we don't want to do. They're out of alignment with our values that hold us back. And then we just start to do things that we would not do for a cousin or a best friend. So it's just not a good place to be. So, you look at fear as one side of the coin, other side is trust. So how do we approach that sales process? How do we approach marketing? How do we approach those sales conversations or even making offers in a way that is very much telling our people the truth, that is being very transparent? We are like, hey, what you see is what you get. There's no surprises here. We are taking away the pressure. We are providing the time people need to make decisions. We are treating people with respect and fairness. So much of the buyer's journey in online business is designed to benefit one person, and that person is the seller.
Yep.
No, the buyer, not the seller.
Yep.
The buyer?
Oh,
no, it's designed to benefit the seller. I got that wrong. Yeah, I was right. I overthought that for a second. End of the day, I'm losing it a little bit. So, it's designed to benefit the seller, not the buyer. Like, how do we make sure it's a win-win with the buyer? And then finally, results. How do we, provide an outcome where it is truly in service of both of us? So much of the approach to results in online business is I'm going to sell you this thing that only like 1% of my clients hadn't ever been able to achieve. But then I'm going to turn it around on you when you can't do it and screw you up. Like it's your mindset. You're not playing big enough. You're not following the system. And, there's a lot of things in life that are like that. But if we can show up in a way that's kind of taking those elements of trust and building trust versus doing these things constantly to break trust, it's a lot easier to sell. Like when I get on with someone, I'm like, hey, let's talk about this. Let's see if it's a fit for you. And then we go from there. There is zero pressure. I did a sales call this afternoon and she was like, when is this closing? I said, Friday, but if you need to take the weekend, that's fine. Send me an email if you have any questions. Like, and if it's not right this time, catch me next time.
Yeah.
Not a big deal.
Yeah, 100%. And there's this thing going around where people get them to actually pay on the call. And I'm like, that's terrible. I would, like, I know myself, I would 100% feel pressure to pay on the call. And I would hate myself. It's actually happened to me. I've lost $5,000 on a call because I didn't feel okay saying no. I mean, I was super new to the industry. I'd say no now, but like, it's predatory. There's no other way to like, it's predatory.
I hear these stories all the time. And this is why, from a consumer point of view, like if I do nothing else, I want consumers to know they have choices. And the second someone is talking to you about how you're going to pay for something, suggesting that you split payments, asking for payments on a call, that is the biggest red flag of red flags, like flashing lights, stars, like it's an entire fireworks show. You need to get out of there, because that person, the only person benefiting is the person collecting your $5,000. And I saw this fascinating conversation in a community, which I quickly exited. Someone said this had happened to them, and everyone said, you need to take responsibility. That's the kind of zeitgeist in the online business space of like, well, you know what? Like, you need to take responsibility. It's your mindset, and it's so wrong. And here's the thing that pisses me off. This happens because we have no consumer protections. There is no accountability. The odds are stacked against consumers. So the only way we can change this is consumers start to cut off the supply. We say, nope, I'm not going to do business with you if you do that. You're trying to coach me under the call without giving me a price? Nope, I'm not doing that. So once you start to spot those tactics, you can divest from them. And then as a service provider, a business owner, you can not use them in your own business. And you can also coach your clients, if you have them, not to use them as well.
I love it. I love it so much. One of the big things that I see in the launch space a lot is like, all long form sales pages, they have glowing testimonials on them, but they never ever talk about the other side. And that was one of the big catalysts behind Terrain as well, because I'm like, I've been duped by courses that I've paid thousands of dollars for because I saw great reviews on them, like great testimonials, but then there's no, like, you never get to see the other side. And when we created Terrain, we're like, nope, reviews. Like, you can give somebody a 1-star review and it's never getting taken down. Like, they can respond to it, but that's it. Like, that is everything. I mean, like, one of the big reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is because I remember when your big essay came out about how small business owners are investing in online learning and like their experiences with things like that. And there's just, and that came out when we were building Terrain, and that informed so much of our thinking around the kinds of mechanisms we wanted to have in place to make sure people don't actually get duped. So I'm really excited that you were able to be here. And honestly, just even listening to your podcast I'm learning so much from it. Like, for example, our series is called Terrain Experts. You had an episode about the word expert, and that just set me off on a tangent. I'm like, are we using this appropriately? And I had a conversation with our CMO about it. I'm like, can we actually use this word? And we came to the conclusion that, and you can totally call me out on this while we're recording if you think this is a bad idea, and I'm totally open to that, because it is a learning process, right? What we decided is we're going to keep the title experts, but we're going to be super freaking sure that everyone we bring on is an actual expert, and that's going to be our line. And that's everything we're trying to do with Terrain, is like, make sure our tagline is learn from the best, not the most famous. So like, yes, that's exactly what we're trying to do. So I love it. So just to kind of recap for everybody, what are like the big patterns that they need to watch out for to avoid being duped? Because like, I know we talked about it, but I lost them.
So there's this kind of category of entrepreneurs I call the celebrity entrepreneurs. And I think one of the things we really have to watch for is we're very trained to look for kind of what I call the luxury lifestylers, which, you know, the Burwas and the Babes and the non-binary, whatever in between that is, of these people who are very much selling the lifestyle. But those aren't the only people selling these dreams to us. There's, you know, someone who's like your best friend next door. You've got Rebel Creatives. You've got all these different types. So we need to get very savvy and stop looking at the packaging and the brand and start looking for the tactics. So things like invented authority, like exactly what you said earlier, like, is this person an influencer and they're selling me ideas, or like, they're selling me their lifestyle, or like, do they have a body of work? Are they using results not typical social proof? Are they using income claim marketing? Like, those are all hallmarks of invented authority. Watch for insider secrets. They really play on prestige and belonging. They tell you they have the perfect only solution. And oh, by the way, that solution always works for everybody. You're a service provider, you're a course creator. Like, that lack of specificity is a red flag. Watch for weaponized stories and sales tactics. So things like gating the price, those sales calls tactics we talked about, the very dramatic and traumatic stories we touched on. And then finally, watch for mindset manipulation. If you cannot ask questions or challenge authority, if you are witnessing blaming everyone, but it's never the leader's fault. It couldn't be the program. Constantly blaming the customer, toxic positivity. You start to see any of those things, it's a red flag that maybe you shouldn't do business. And I think the best thing we can do is, beyond getting familiar with these, is slow down. Really get to know people before you spend money with them. It is better for you to wait 6 months to enroll in something later and be sure than to drop $10,000 and have an instant case of buyer's remorse, because these programs are very hard to get out of, and it's very hard to get your money back because there is no consumer mechanism to do so.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, if anybody tells you to go get like a credit card, go into debt for a program, do you remember this really big launch last year when the pandemic was rolling out, where she told everyone to go borrow money from friends and go into debt just as the pandemic was rolling out?
Yeah. Or I've seen ones where they have like a credit application they will fill out with you on the phone, or they encourage you to get creative. Like, anyone who is coaching you about how to pay for something or telling you to get a job, like a part-time side hustle to pay for it, this person is not looking out for you.
Yeah.
They are serving themselves only. And they really push this invest at all costs message, and they really, really put the screws to us to try to extract that money because they want to make that sale no matter what.
100%. Oh, this was an incredible conversation. Thank you so much. I feel like, we're going to be pushing this hard everywhere. I think everybody needs to listen to this. Where can they go more to learn? I mean, they should be listening to Duped, but beyond that, where can people go to learn more about you and your work?
So listen to Duped, listen to the BS Free Service Business Podcast, because Duped is limited series. So you can get lots of Maggie and then some Maggie and Michelle with Duped when we're in our seasons. I hang out on Instagram at Small Business Boss, and of course the website smallbusinessboss.co.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.